Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here with us today for this meeting on our Plan Toronto. So my name is Kristen Lillyman, and I'm an engagement specialist with Dillon Consulting, and I'll be your facilitator for today. We have been working with the city to coordinate and facilitate the engagement for the Municipal Comprehensive Review, or as you may know it, our Plan Toronto. Many of you may have attended and participated in meetings with the city in the past in the fall, or recently in April, we had meetings on environment and climate change. So this is our final meeting in a series of meetings to present the draft policies, the vision, and directions, some of which will go to Planning and Housing Committee on July 5th. But this specific meeting is an open house being held pursuant to the Planning Act, as the city proposes to revise policies in its official plan through the upcoming Municipal Comprehensive Review under Section 26 of the Planning Act. Next slide. So we'll begin today with a land acknowledgement. The City of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The city also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Acknowledging the land that we are on is only a small piece of recognizing the contributions, the history of Indigenous peoples, and as well as our ongoing learning and our progress towards reconciliation. It is also important to recognize that the Indigenous connection to the land that we now call Toronto, as well as Lake Ontario, dates back at least 10,000 years. A key part of our Plan Toronto is and has been the integration of Indigenous voices, perspectives, history, and understandings as part of this process. And the team has also integrated the great work on the Reconciliation Action Plan into this draft renewed official plan, which you will hear more about later on in this presentation. Next slide. I'll just take you through the agenda for today. So the agenda for today includes the background and a refresher on the official plan, an overview of the major transit station areas, an update on employment policies and employment area conversions, an overview, as I just mentioned, of Indigenous planning perspectives, and also the draft official plan vision statement and directions. There will be time, as you can see on the agenda, between each section for discussion and questions. We will then wrap up the meeting by 3 p.m. today, and we'll share some next steps with you on how you can continue to be engaged. Next slide. So a few introductions of who is in the meeting today. So we are joined today by those at the city who are leading the official plan, and that includes Jeff Cantos, who I will now ask to introduce the rest of the city team.
Thanks, Kristen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Great. Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jeff Cantos, the manager of the city's official plan team in the group leading the Municipal Comprehensive Review. And I'm joined with a number of members of my team and others from other city sections. So with me is Christina Haydorn, the official plan project manager, Jason Sang, also with the official plan team, Philip Parker, who is on the who's here with the EHON team, the Expanding Housing Options in Neighborhoods, along with Lillian D'Souza, our major transit station area team, Joshua Wise, Liam O'Toole. We have Deanna Charney, our manager of policy, who can field questions on housing and housing matters, including inclusionary zoning, and Rebecca Condon from Economic Development and Culture, who's been working with city planning with us on the employment area conversion requests and other matters. And I think that covers our team. Over to you, Kristen.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So from Dillon Consulting, along with myself, we have Nicole Bugley and Ish Chowdhury, who will be helping to manage the meeting from behind the scenes, including taking meeting minutes and also responding in the chat. So I'd also love to welcome participants. I see 80 participants with us today. So please introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know who's here. You can get to know each other, and it is open for your interaction. Next slide. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get into the main part of the meeting tonight. Please remain muted while you're not talking. If you do have a question or comment, you can use the chat function or raise your hand. If you are dialing in, you can press 3 to raise your hand. There will be dedicated discussion points, as you saw on the agenda, for discussion and to address questions. And if you do raise your hand, please introduce yourself before asking your question. So as you may have noticed, the meeting is being recorded today, but we will only post the presentation component of this meeting on our Plan Toronto website. The comments and question and discussion that occur today, they will be used for note-taking purposes only. So a little note on my role as meeting facilitator. So my job is to manage the discussion and make sure that everyone gets a chance to be heard. And to ensure that everyone is able to participate and gets a chance to be heard, we ask that you really think about and ask the question that you most want to have answered today. We do strongly suggest one question per person in order to get to as many questions as possible today, and you will be held accountable to that. So if you don't get your questions answered live today, there was always our website and an email address, but there's also going to be a Q&A in our engagement records. Next slide. So again, we welcome your questions and discussion today. There are no bad questions, and chances are if you're thinking it, someone else is as well. We do want to hear from everybody, and everyone has wisdom and experience to share. On that note, there will likely be differences in opinion, so just try to be respectful and listen. The city is also here today to listen to your feedback, hear your thoughts and hear your perspectives, so please don't be shy in sharing them. Next slide, we'll just go to an additional note on the chat function. So again, the chat box will be available throughout the meeting. We are encouraging use of the chat box to share ideas, get to know each other. I love how people are introducing themselves right now. That's great, so welcome and thank you. The city team and our Dillon team will be monitoring the chat, and we will try to respond to questions when we can. So just a reminder in the chat, just a reminder to be respectful. We do want to keep it active, but if there are any disrespectful or abusive comments, we will have to close the chat. The next slide. Okay, so why are we here today? Well, city staff are going to provide an overview of the draft employment policies, the major transit station area delineations, and the draft vision and directions for the official plan. We do want to hear your feedback, so we're going to open up again to questions and dialogue. And we'll also share next steps with you and how you can continue to be engaged. Next slide. So this slide here, it provides kind of a quick snapshot of the project process. So the project initially launched in May of last year, and we've gone through parts 1, the vision and priorities, and part 2, asking big questions and setting policy directions. And during that time in part 1 and part 2, the city and our Dillon engagement team were doing a lot of listening, and that was through public meetings, youth engagement, online engagement and surveys, meetings with Indigenous rights holders and organizations, and through a community leader circle. Now we are at the point in part 3 where the city has created draft policies. And we are continuing to meet with people and host meetings with people and organizations to discuss our Plan Toronto. And so far in phase 3, we have held meetings specific to the draft environment and climate change policies, which went to the May 31st Planning and Housing Committee and will be followed by City Council on June 15th. So we are now in the midst of hosting a series of public meetings on some of the other draft official plan policies, which are leading to a report on July 5th. And we're going to share some other upcoming meeting dates as well at the end of this presentation. Next slide. So this slide shows just an engagement overview of the engagement to date. So in part 1 and part 2, and so far in part 3, we have held over 60 meetings and met with over 2,000 people. And that's been including internal and external stakeholders, organizations, companies, and residents. And this work had and did include a particular focus on reaching underrepresented populations and groups that work with them. So that included Indigenous rights holders and organizations, youth through schools and school boards, seniors through the Seniors Roundtable, and there were some focus discussions and conversations like around accessibility and specific geographies like Scarborough. So we also had an online component to this engagement. We had an Art Plan website, and we also had Story Maps, which is an online resource to explore information, data, maps, all related to Art Plan Toronto. And they have received over 10,000 visits. Next slide. So this is kind of the key themes that we have come up with. They're all organized, our team organized all the feedback to date into these key themes. The cross-cutting themes on your left, these are themes that came forward in every meeting across different organizations and groups, in different communities and with Indigenous organizations. What emerged was having a few things, but one theme was having a key focus on equity, inclusion, and relationship building. And that included addressing inequities across the city, be more inclusive, reflect the diversity of the city, require universal and accessible design. Another theme was community-led solutions. So that involved working collaboratively with communities, especially when it came to big change in neighborhoods and big development. Learning from the past and implementation, and that involved an understanding and gaining an understanding of the history of communities and the history of issues. Aligning priorities and conversations, and that really meant getting everyone on the same page, and that included leadership alignment. So the other themes that you can see there in the darker green, those are themes that were the most frequently discussed issues. Housing affordability and the scale of intensification, and that included the need to balance development with infrastructure like green space and transit. Environment and climate change, so that was the meetings we held back in April specifically, but that some of the themes that were involved there was get to net zero, promote active transit, protect green space and trees, jobs. So that was another theme that was raised quite common and particularly heightened through COVID. Safety, complete communities. So where every neighborhood needs a complete communities approach, and they need to have universal design so people don't age out. Next slide. So we're going to have these throughout the meeting today, and we're calling them engagement moments, but they are involving live polling. So we'll go to the next slide and I'll explain a little bit more, but if you can pull out your smartphone, or you can use your desktop computer and just go to www.mentee.com, and someone will also put that into the chat, so you can just click on the link there. And you can also scan the QR code that's on the screen with your smartphone camera app. So once you get to mentee.com, you will enter the code that is now on the screen. So it's 68366044. And you'll click the link once prompted, but that's the code there, and it's also in the chat. So we'll now go over to our Mentee live polling results. And so we have a few questions tonight or today. The first one is just, where are you participating from? And we have some people still responding there. We seem to have across the city representation, and a few from outside of Toronto. So welcome. It seems the bulk is from Toronto East York, and then we have some in Etobicoke, North York, and Scarborough. Great, we'll see if a few more people respond. I see some responses, yeah, still rolling in. And again, if you haven't got there yet, you can see the address and the code on the top of your screen now. So it's mentee.com and code 68366044. We'll go to the next question. So this is, have you participated in other Art Plan Toronto engagement activities in the past? So I talked about some of the engagement activities that have occurred throughout the process since May of last year. So this is just if you have participated in any of the various activities, could be online, could have been meetings. So we have many people who have returned. So we have so far 17 people who, or 18 people who, yes, they have participated in activities in the past. So welcome back. And we have many joining us for the first time. So thank you for joining us today. Okay, so maybe we'll go to the next question. So this is a follow-up question for those of you who have participated in the past. Just wondering how you previously participated. So we have a few options here: attended a citywide virtual meeting, attended a different virtual meeting, so that it could include a stakeholder meeting, completed an online survey, a member of the community leaders circle, website, social media, or visited the story map. And you can click all that apply here. Okay, so many of you have attended a citywide virtual meeting in the past, or some of the other meetings we've held. And a few of you have also participated online through surveys, website, social media, story maps. And we have one person who's a member of the Community Leaders Circle as well. Great. Okay, we'll go to the next question. So the next question is just to get an understanding, because we're here today talking about the official plan, we want to know how familiar are you with the Toronto official plan. So we have a bit of a scale here from not at all to extremely. So just trying to rank kind of your familiarity with the official plan. And just to give us a sense of who's with us today and how we can tailor the presentation accordingly. So many people have quite a bit of familiarity with the official plan, it seems, and then a few people not at all, which is totally fine. We are providing an official plan refresher right after this section here, and one slightly as well. Okay, so we'll go to the next question. This will be our last question for this section. And it's for those of you who do use the official plan, how do you currently use it? As a resident, as a member of a group or organization, for work, as a student for your education, other, or not sure? For the other, I'd be curious to see how you use it and how you're using the official plan. So you can comment in the chat on how you currently do use this document. Okay, so for the majority of people do use it for work, and many of you as a resident or a member of a group as well, or student. So thanks everyone. I think that's the last question for this section, but I will ask you to leave Mentimeter open on your phone or on your desktop for the duration of the meeting, because we will go back to these live polling questions throughout the meeting. Some are to get your feedback on certain things we'll be presenting. And some of them are to test how familiar or to understand how familiar you are with the project. And some are testing if you're paying attention. So keep it open and we'll be asking for your feedback throughout the meeting today. But for now, I will hand it over to Jeff to provide an overview and a refresher on the official plan.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Great. Hi again, everyone. And thanks for participating in the Mentimeter polling. It helps give me a sense of how much of a deep dive I should go into the official plan. And so part of the reason why we're here this afternoon, and thank you again for joining us, I see there's over 100 of you spending a bit of your afternoon with us, is that the province of Ontario requires all the municipalities within the Greater Golden Horseshoe area to review our official plans regularly to make sure that our official plan that it conforms with and aligns with regional provincial plans that I'll talk about in a bit. And for the City of Toronto, the province has set population and job forecasts of a minimum of 700,000 people that we have to plan for and a minimum of 450,000 jobs, again, that we have to demonstrate that we have a plan in place. And there's a number of other requirements that we will take you through this afternoon. But next slide, please. So the City of Toronto on the far right, our population in 2021 is it was nearing 2.8 million. We are nestled into what I mentioned earlier was the Greater Golden Horseshoe area that has a population of over 10 million. And the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, includes our neighboring municipalities, and as far as the Niagara region, to the south and west, all the way up to the county of Peterborough in the east. And the GGH, the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, is obviously nestled into the province of Ontario with a population nearing 15 million. Next slide, please. So this graphic shows the nestling of our land use, the nestling within our land use planning system that we work under in Ontario. So at the very top are matters of provincial interest, and this includes the Planning Act and the provincial policy statement. It is those documents that municipalities are governed by in terms of how we do land use planning. And when you go down one level, you go into the regional growth. So the province has the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, that geography that Toronto is nestled in. And you may have heard of the Greenbelt Plan, again, more regional growth or no growth plans that municipalities have to conform to. And in the middle there is a citywide vision. And that's what we're talking about here today, the Toronto Official Plan. And below or within, nestled in the official plan, are area priorities. So they may be secondary plans, local area studies, sometimes they're called precinct plans, and sometimes those are within the official plan. And then when you get closer to more of the more detailed specific implementation, there are zoning bylaws, and the specific buildings, there are site-specific precision. So the like the number of parking spaces required, for example, in a given development. Next slide, please. So the official plan, again, the subject that we're talking about today, is a city planning document that acts as Toronto's roadmap for land use matters. It sets out our long-term vision, shared values, and policies that help guide decision-making in land development, economic growth, the environment, and more. And it's an important document. It's an important plan that helps direct decision-making in terms of the different types of development and where they should and should not go. So again, the province requires us, municipalities within the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, to regularly review our official plan, and that's what we're doing. Next slide, please. The Toronto official plan, as we're reviewing it, has 5 chapters of policy, with policies in them. And the largest gear there at the bottom is the land use designation chapter, chapter 4, and to the right of it is a really a small thumbnail of the City of Toronto and the land use designation map, to which policies apply to the different types of land use designations. And on the next slide, when we break down the city, the official plan currently sets the city out. Again, as I mentioned, in different land use designations, 75% of the city is not expected to grow, where 25% of the city is accommodated, of the city will accommodate most of the growth for the 30 years. Again, the plan that we're reviewing is set to 2030. The growth forecast that I was talking about earlier from the province requires us to plan to 2050. So a new, what we call a planning horizon. And the diagram on the right, if you were to carve up the city in 100 perfect blocks, you'll see that about 19% of the city are roads, to which we don't put land use designations on. About 35% of the city are neighborhoods, the yellow blocks there in the middle. And if we scoot down to the bottom, the designations intended for growth, so for residential growth, of about 5%, 5.3%, I believe, is of mixed use areas designated in the official plan, and about 13% are what we call our employment areas. There are 2 different types: core employment areas and general employment areas. Again, this is the official plan that we are currently reviewing. Over to you, Kristen. I believe the next slide is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So we're going to go to a polling question, and then we'll go to 10 minutes for Q&A on that section of the official plan refresher. But we'll go to our question, and this is a bit of testing if you're paying attention there to Jeff's presentation. So what is the official plan? And you can select all that apply. A roadmap for planning in Toronto, sets the long-term vision for the city, directs where development should go, provides the building blocks for complete communities, or all of the above. Give you a few moments here to get your answers in. Okay, so quickly we can see that most of you have selected all of the above, which is the correct answer, but also all of these are correct. So it is a roadmap for planning. It sets a long-term vision, directs where development should go, and provides the building blocks for complete communities. And I'm going to hand it over to Josh to provide an overview of the major transit station areas and protected major transit station areas.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, and welcome everyone. So good to hear that people are already starting to think about some of the themes that I'll speak to in this deck. And certainly if I don't get hit on everything that's been mentioned or that you're thinking about, we have another Q&A at the end as well. So I'll speak to, as Kristen mentioned, the major transit station areas, protected major transit station areas. This is one of the main components of our municipal comprehensive review. This is bring us into conformity with growth plan policies, as Jeff mentioned, one of those higher level pieces of policy that we need to conform to. So within the growth plan, there are requirements that we delineate every single subway station, LRT station, and GO station that's identified in the growth plan. We draw a delineation around, so basically a border of the area that represents about a 10-minute walk shed, or 500 to 800 meters from the main entrance of the station. So if you can picture opening the door to your house, to your school, community center, if you're able to walk from there to the entrance of the station, our delineation should be capturing that area, so that 500 to 800 meter radius around a station. Within that radius, within that circle area, and the kind of visual on the top right shows how you can imagine it. We need to demonstrate that there is a planning framework that is in place that supports growth plans targets. And the growth plans targets essentially are to make sure that we're focusing intensification and density within walking distance of these transit stations. So we want to make sure that some of the themes that came up, I think Robert mentioned, having walkability to stations, having different diversity of uses, but having lots of residents and lots of jobs close to transit so that they can move through the city easily. That's the goal of these policies. So around subway stations, the policy, the framework we need to have is for 200 people and jobs per hectare. At LRTs, it's 160, and at GO rail stations, it's 150 people and jobs per hectare. These are minimums that are sent by the province through the growth plan. But in many areas, and I'll speak to it later, Toronto's planning framework may allow for much higher densities. But again, this policy is about demonstrating conformity to the growth plan and making sure we have those minimums in place. So you can go to the next slide, Nicole. So the next slide will show a map of all of the stations that we have brought forward to Planning and Housing Committee, either for consultation or there's a few groupings that we have brought forward in final form as well. So on the screen, you see the kind of that light blue outline around all of the stations that we've identified. There's about 150 there on the screen. To note, we've put a kind of gray hatching over the Shepherd East LRT in the top right in Scarborough. We've received feedback from the province that we shouldn't be proceeding with the Shepherd East LRT in this municipal comprehensive review, but may need to in a future municipal comprehensive review. So other than that, we have been consulting on these stations through a number of different tools, but these are the ones that we are currently considering. Next slide. So a component of the major transit station area work is identifying a subset known as protected major transit station areas. So across the city, we've now identified about 100 major transit station areas. Those, as I mentioned, all of the stations identified through the growth plan. A subset of those will be these PMTSAs, protected major transit station areas. And protected major transit station areas, the important thing to know, this is the one area that the Planning Act allows municipalities like Toronto to unlock inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary zoning is the policy tool which the city now has in place since the fall that will require certain percentage of affordable housing to be included in new residential development. So in order to unlock this tool, the city has done analysis looking at the different market areas across the city. You can see the 3 shades of blue there on the map, and the link if you want more information or better resolution of this map. So anywhere where there's a market area in the city that would support inclusionary zoning, and this is an analysis that has been approved by council. Anywhere where there's one of those shades of blue matched up against one of the 140 major transit station areas, that's where we're identifying a protected major transit station area and bringing forward those policies for council to approve. And again, so we can unlock inclusionary zoning. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this is a two-step growth management strategy. You can see the graph in the bottom right. The green is what we're speaking to today. This is the step that we need to undertake in order to demonstrate conformity with the growth plan. And the key element, one of the key elements of this is identifying what the minimum planned density is within the existing planning framework. So we're looking at the as of right zoning, what the official plan policies allow for, the existing census data, so how many people, how many jobs are there today, as well as any new development that has recently been built or is in the planning process as well. Moving forward, we'll move into that step 2, so looking at future density near transit station areas, and that is where we'll look beyond those minimum planned densities, what the stations should look like, what individual stations should look like, and so that will involve potentially local area studies, zoning updates, as well as review of development applications. This work is ongoing and certainly will continue into the future. Right now there are ongoing planning studies at Danforth, Golden Mile, Mount Dennis, Midtown, and others that are informing what these stations will look like moving into the future, and are looking at densities beyond the minimum planned density outlined in the growth plan. So next slide. So just kind of catching up on where we are today. Currently, there's about 130 draft major transit station areas that we have brought forward to Planning and Housing Committee, and we are currently consulting on. This meeting, of course, is part of that consultation process. We also have an MTSA interactive engagement tool, which I'll go into a bit more detail on in another slide. We've also brought forward 19 final protected major transit station areas that have been adopted by council. So a few of the numbers are a little bit out of date on the screen, but 19 final protected major transit station areas have been adopted. And coming up on the July 5th Planning and Housing Committee, we are looking to bring forward 115 protected major transit station areas and major transit station areas. So within that July 5th report, we'll include 86 PMTSAs and 29 MTSAs. Of those, 10 of them we will be looking for alternative targets to the minimum planned density in the growth plan. There will be, with all of those MTSAs, we'll have 115 site and area specific policies, SASPs, which will include the delineation, that boundary around, the minimum planned density, the authorized uses of the land within those areas, and for those 86 PMTSAs, protected major transit station areas, we'll also include a minimum development density, which is a requirement of the Planning Act. So these are 23 GO stations, 37 LRT, 62 subway stations. 7 of them, if you're counting my math, 7 of those are interchange stations. So this is the report that we're bringing to Planning and Housing Committee. The only remaining major transit station areas that require additional studies. So again, the number on the screen is incorrect, but it's 7 major transit station areas will still require additional studies. And so those will be the only outstanding stations. I think Phil just posted them in the chat, but these are stations that will require additional study, and we will report back to council in Q1 of 2023 on how we will bring these into conformity with the growth plan moving forward. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this meeting and certainly over the last many months, we have been consulting on these major transit station areas. One of the most effective tools we've been able to create is this interactive engagement tool, and you can find the link there at toronto.ca/ourplan, and I think Phil will also add the link into the chat. But encourage you to go onto the site. I'll kind of quickly run through some of the features of it. But this is a great place to receive feedback, of course, through the chat, through emails, and through the Q&A today. We're also looking to receive any additional feedback. So if you go to the next slide, and I'll try to run through these quickly in the interest of time. But you can scroll through the website. It has a lot of the background information I've just gone over. A lot of the maps you've seen in my deck are up on the screen as well. Next slide. You can scroll down to the bottom, and that's where the actual interactive tool is. There you can navigate both in a map view or by searching a station name to find a particular station you may be interested in. Next slide. We have a few screen grabs. These are from Bay Station, just to give you a sense of what the different information you can review are at each station. So you can see what the estimated population was as of the 2016 census, what the planned density is, what our proposed minimum density is. All these numbers are captured there. Next slide. We can also compare what the different densities are. So if you wanted to look at basically those numbers in chart form, that information is there. Go to the next slide. Within the map view, there's also a number of different layers like the zoning bylaw, the minimum density, things that you can click on and off, show these different layers so you can understand what the geography looks like, some of these different overlapping policies and plans that are in place. And the next slide. Also kind of the background metadata. So we have that all captured. You can see the details tab at the bottom there. That's where you can access all of that. Get links to any supporting document, understand the approval status of the station. So as I said, we've got 19 that have been council approved, 115 that we're looking to bring forward, some that are still awaiting more clarity. And then also all those different statistics that you saw in chart form. And I believe that's, oh, sorry. And the most important part, we're looking for feedback. So there is great opportunity to do station specific feedback. Also, if you have more broad feedback, you can still plug it in through this tool. We are collecting feedback continually until we finalize this report for the July 5th committee. So looking to get as much feedback right now is quite a timely moment. If you know, we are looking at this basically daily to see what kind of feedback we're getting and considering all of that as we are working to create recommended official plan amendments for the July 5th committee. I think that's the last slide I've got.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Josh, for that presentation and for walking us through that Story Maps tool. So we'll go to some live polling now. We have a few questions for you about MTSAs. So if you open up your Mentimeter again on your smartphone or your desktop, we'll go to this question here. So do you live or work near or within an identified MTSA? So the answers here, yes, I live near one, yes, I work near one, no, and I don't know. And if you don't know, I encourage you to check out our plan website and that story map tool so you can check out kind of the locations of them and explore the MTSA in detail. But many of you live near one and some of you work near one and others do not. Kind of a mix in attendance today. So maybe go to our next question. So this is that tool that Josh just walked us through, the MTSA tool. Have you used it? Have you explored it on our plan website? So yes, no, and I will after this meeting. And I see lots of you are saying you will after this meeting, so that's great. Okay, so many of you checking it out after this meeting and many of you already have, so it's great. We'll go to our last question for this section. So this is those minimum targets that Josh just walked you through. Should they be increased? So those are the minimum targets related to the number of people and the number of jobs, the density targets. So yes, no, and I don't know. So many of you so far are saying yes, some no, and some I don't know. Okay, many of you are saying yes. Okay. So that was the last question for this section, but again, leave that Mentimeter open because we will have more questions.
Thanks, Kristen. So we're about at the halfway mark of the presentation. So I will go through this, and there's two more shorter presentations that follow the question and answer period after the employment areas. And I'm going to start off with a statement on the next slide that our employment areas, again, this is the 13% of the purple lands in the city that are intended for non-residential growth, serve a public interest. And what do I mean when I say that? So the 13% of lands that we have in the city that are purple, that are core employment areas or general employment areas, provide low barrier entry jobs for newcomers to Canada, those who face challenges having their professional credentials or certifications recognized, and individuals where English is not their first language. These lands provide a living wage, employment opportunities in local communities where there is transit access. What we found over the pandemic that some of our busiest transit routes were the surface bus routes in our suburbs, connecting where people live to where they work in their essential jobs, as we now call them. And these 13% of our city provide a land use certainty for operating businesses, again, that provide the essential goods and services that needed to continue to operate. Where me myself, I had the privilege of being able to work from home over the course of the pandemic. Next slide, please. So again, with that whole nestling concept, the province in the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe on the left identifies what are called provincially significant employment zones, and there's the City of Toronto nestled within the Greater Golden Horseshoe region, and then the City of Toronto in the center, where 13% of our employment lands, those that are core employment areas or general employment areas, are located across the city. And in total, there are about 8,100 hectares of employment areas in the city that accommodate over 400,000 jobs, and that's 25% of all the jobs across the city, and 92% of the manufacturing, industrial, and warehousing jobs are all, 92% of all the manufacturing, warehousing, and industrial jobs are found within our employment areas. Again, the 13% across the city. And on the next slide, and I won't go through every single recommendation, but the city hired a consulting firm named Hemson Consulting that did a 18-month study for us looking at our employment areas. And they came up with a slew, I think there's 20 recommendations, and we can put the link to the study in the chat. But some of the recommendations to us were about preserving lands, in these employment lands, near major goods movement facilities and corridors, prohibiting residential uses in our employment areas, and the city advocating to the province for additional provincially significant employment zones as well. And then a slew of other recommendations. Again, we can put the link to the study if you want to go through it. Next slide. Some select employment study findings from Hemson were, again, going back to the equity lens, that these employment areas, again, that 13% are important in achieving the city's equity goals, particularly given their strategic locations across the city. And many of our employment areas are also very close to what the city calls neighborhood improvement areas that, again, have good access to transit. And our neighborhood improvement areas are those neighborhoods across the city that have not seen as much infrastructure investment into them as others. In terms of office, Hemson also had a company named Cushman & Wakefield look at our office market. And their recommendation to us at the city was it was too early for us to determine what permanent effects may happen in the office working practices, given return to work, hybrid arrangements. So their recommendation to us was to continue to monitor and track key office indicators before the city makes or recommends any changes to our office policies in the official plan. An interesting finding that Hemson came up with through digging through some data from our buildings department was that the value of new industrial building permits within employment areas averaged over $48 million annually since 2000. So the value of a building permit is directly related to the complexity of what's being proposed. So over 48 million annually since 2000. The value of addition and renovation permits averaged around 39 million per year, again, since the year 2000. And structural and other permits average just under 26,000 per year, again, since 2000. And this level of private investment into our employment areas, I believe, show a level of confidence in our employment areas as a place to establish new businesses, or invest in existing ones to keep the those essential jobs and good paying jobs here in Toronto. Okay, next slide, please. We here at the city are proposing a new policy in our official plan that supports e-commerce. And so what e-commerce is basically our online shopping habits as consumers. And what we have found, and what Hemson also recommended, is that e-commerce requires centrally situated sites with good access to highways and major roads. So the picture on the right is when Amazon announced that they were going to build a distribution warehouse in Northeast Scarborough. It's just a picture of another type of a major fulfillment center that they have elsewhere. So Scarborough's going to have one in Northeast. So the new policy that we are proposing or recommending is that new multi-level industrial development, such as the ones like the picture on the right, and last mile fulfillment centers, are optimally situated to deliver goods to the urban market. And that's, again, to accommodate most of our shopping habits and the expectation to have things come overnight. Next slide, please. Another policy that we are looking into results from the provincial requirement for municipalities to prohibit residential uses in employment areas. So they tell us that we have to prohibit them. We're not allowed to permit them in our employment areas. And the official plan that we're reviewing has, I think, 13 or 14 specific instances in which the lands are designated employment areas, core or general, again, the 13% of purple across the city. However, they have what's called a site and area specific policy. These are exemptions to the rule that actually permit residential uses. So members of my team are looking at these 12, 13, 14 areas across the city that you see circled in orange, and we'll be providing a draft of our findings at July 5th Planning and Housing Committee, with final recommendations to come to council early in the new year, 2023. So the work is continuing on this requirement that the province requires municipalities to look at. So there's going to also be a new policy that prohibits residential, but in the meantime, we're also going to look at this policy, aligning the policies with what the growth plan requires us to do on a site-specific basis. The next slide, please. So the province also allows landowners to submit what are called employment area conversions during a municipal comprehensive review. And what an employment conversion is the introduction of a non-permitted use into one of our employment areas, either core or general, again, the 13% across the city. And so one of these non-permitted uses include residential. And so through this process, the city received over 140 of these conversion requests across the city. And this triggers the need for city staff, planning, members of my team, members of economic and development team to carefully consider each of these. And when I say carefully consider, there are provincial tests and policies that the city must consider before allowing or recommending a conversion. And the city also has multiple tests that we have to look into prior to recommending approval of any conversion. And so, as I mentioned, we received over 140, which amounts to about 685 hectares across the city. And the orange dots, if you zoom in, you can see where they're located and where they're concentrated. And this accounts to about 8.5% of all of our employment areas. And so for the July 5th Planning and Housing Committee, we won't be responding to all of the 140, we will be recommending, I think it's between 20 and 30 conversion requests, and we can put the list of those sites in the chat that will be part of that report. And the remainder, the 100 or so, will be going forward in in early 2023. The committee schedule is not yet published for the new year, but that's when the remainder will go for consideration. Next slide, please. And so, in terms of the employment conversion process, the next steps, so part of the process was that members of my team in economic development wrote what we called preliminary assessments. We wrote over 120 of them that we brought forward to Planning and Housing Committee, and we can put the link of our site of where you can find these preliminary assessments. We did them in batches, just given the volume that we have. Members of my team undertook broad engagement. We met with the proponents, sometimes multiple times. We met with area businesses, stakeholders. We did a series of sector-specific engagement. There's a meeting in 2 weeks about the employment and future of work, specifically to talk about this policy matter. Members of my team in economic development are undertaking what I called previously the careful consideration. And what that is a very technical review, both at the citywide scale and also at the very, very site-specific scale, looking at what's next door, what potential impacts can the introduction of residential be on a specific site, and then finally for July 5th. For July 5th Planning and Housing Committee, we will be recommending a number of conversion requests along with the policies that I mentioned in the slides before. And we will take, actually, I'm going to pass it back to Kristen. Kristen, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. We are going to go to a polling question before we get into a Q&A. So you can think of your questions already, but open that Mentimeter and you'll have a question about employment areas. So the question is, again, kind of testing if you were paying attention to Jeff's presentation there, protecting employment areas will help with the following. And there's a few responses there. Will it provide jobs for newcomers, help provide living wage jobs, provide spaces for businesses, help with Toronto's economic competitiveness, none of the above, or other? So many of you are probably choosing all 4 of those first responses. A couple of people have said other, so curious, you can add it in the chat, what you think, your thoughts around what protecting employment areas will help with. But Jeff outlined in his presentation kind of those 4 key things, that it provides jobs for newcomers, it helps provide a living wage jobs, provide spaces for businesses, and with Toronto's economic competitiveness. Okay, thank you everyone for participating. We still will have a couple more questions for you throughout the day here. Great,
thanks, Kristen. And these next 2 segments are a little bit shorter than the others, so we've got about a half hour. So in terms of Indigenous planning perspectives, in reviewing our official plan, again, not a requirement of the province, but we took this opportunity to reflect on what the official plan is today and what we believe it should be considered to be changed. And one of these changes is about, on the next slide, please, the intersection between the city's recently adopted Reconciliation Action Plan. Council unanimously adopted that in April of this year, and where that intersects with the official plan. And so, we at City Planning, we acknowledge, as part of decolonizing our structures and processes and ways of working, that the official plan must acknowledge that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, their worldviews with respect to land, sea, and air are very different from the colonial approach that has guided land use planning in Ontario. And we understand this and we acknowledge this, and we are proposing changes to our official plan to try and reflect these important issues. And so how did we come to the drafts? On the next slide, please. We did broad-based engagement with treaty rights holders, and many different urban Indigenous organizations that operate in the City of Toronto. We also met with, the city has the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, and there's also the Toronto Aboriginal Support Services Council, with whom we've discussed, the ideas of how and where the Reconciliation Action Plan can intersect with the official plan. And so on the next slide kind of talks about the process that we undertook. So last year, almost a year to the date, we met with, or we presented to the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, the AAAC, to discuss, our Plan Toronto, this official plan review that we're undertaking, and ask them how we should best engage with Indigenous populations. And so for almost 6, 7, 8 months, we met with the groups on that list in the previous slide, where it was, exercises of listening, learning, and sharing more learning and more listening. With some groups, we met multiple times, and it was also an important process for us to build up that relationship with some of the First Nations and urban Indigenous organizations as well that operate here in the city. And so for the last couple of months, me and members of my team, we took what we heard, we reflected, we drafted some words, we reflected some more, we redrafted, and what we came up with we'll be presenting to the AAAC on Monday. And the work's not yet done. We will continue our engagement into post-summer into December, and then have hopefully a final report in early 2023 with recommended changes to the official plan. And I'll take you through some of what we have come up with. On the next slide. So part of our, the draft Indigenous planning perspectives that we are consulting on, engaging on as part of the official plan. So this would go in chapter 1. So right at the beginning, when you would open the official plan, you will see language about that the official plan should and must recognize the importance and purpose of land use acknowledgements. So we start our meetings, the city meetings, with land acknowledgements, and we want to make sure that people who read the official plan understand the importance of them. So it doesn't become a pledge of allegiance at the beginning of the meeting. It is about having a moment of reflection of how of who was here before us and how we can do things differently tomorrow. The parts of the official plan in the beginning in chapter 1, we'd like to ensure that there's direction for us to seek to amplify Indigenous voices in the planning processes. And in doing so, it's about deepening the understanding of contemporary urban Indigenous realities and experiences, again, right up front at the beginning of the official plan. And taken right out of the Reconciliation Action Plan that the City Council recently adopted, we want to continue and this is taken from the Reconciliation Action Plan, is to continue to identify opportunities for Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping initiatives in new development. And then, as we do for other city adopted plans, we would be adding a sidebar or explanatory text describing the Reconciliation Action Plan. And again, it's it is about raising awareness to very important issues of how we plan for 2051. Next slide, please. So I mentioned Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping. So the outcomes of placemaking and placekeeping initiatives, they vary and are critical for the health and well-being of Indigenous peoples. Placemaking and placekeeping initiatives are integral and important to truth, reconciliation, and justice. That the outcomes of placemaking and placekeeping create and nurture space in the process of policy, ceremony. They can be spaces for ceremony, teaching, and community and sharing. And the outcomes of placemaking and placekeeping can strengthen Indigenous connections with lands and water. And again, it's about raising awareness when these outcomes of placemaking and placekeeping manifest themselves within the city. And so our next steps on the next slide is, as I mentioned, on Monday, members of my team and I will be presenting at Toronto's Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee to present a little bit in more detail what I just spoke about. And we will continue our engagement with treaty rights holders and caretakers for urban Indigenous organizations, again into December, and then prepare a final report with Chapter 1 changes for early 2023. And I'm going to vary, Kristen, if we go to the next presentation, and then we can consolidate the questions. So if we go a couple slides down on the official plan, vision, and statement.
Sure, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. So other changes that we are proposing in draft, again, the engagement will continue over after July with the final report in early 23, are the draft official plan 2051 vision statement and the directions of how we get there. And so on this slide kind of shows what we're calling our core graphic, the different ingredients of the directions and principles. And I'll talk to you about the different layers of what this core graphic is meaning to talk about. On the next slide. So in terms of our draft, again, this is for engagement, our draft 2051 vision statement is that the official plan should seek to eliminate disparities experienced by Torontonians. The official plan should prioritize climate change action and sustainability towards net zero by 2040. And the official plan should be the roadmap for Toronto to become the most inclusive city in the world. And I'll take you through these and talk about what I mean. On the next slide, about eliminating disparities. So we know that we know and acknowledge that any type of post-pandemic recovery and rebuild must acknowledge that people with lived experience vary amongst those that have, for example, have had the privilege to work from home and to continue up versus those that had to continue to take transit to get to their jobs. We know that challenging orthodoxies, planning orthodoxies, that it is an acknowledgement of the systemic effects of land use planning that can be gentrification, income and racial segregation, limits to economic opportunities. We have to challenge these and look for outcome-based directions that meaningfully work to reduce disparities and build up what's known as social cohesion. In terms of building complete communities, this means offering support and opportunities for people of all ages and all abilities to conveniently access the necessities of daily life. On the next slide, in terms of climate action, we are prioritizing climate action. We know that climate change is one of the biggest challenges facing our planet, and so our land use decisions should work towards achieving sustainability towards net zero by 2040. And this also includes prioritizing Indigenous worldviews of land protection and around resiliency. And on the next slide, please. Becoming the most inclusive city in the world. So we do know that Toronto is one of the, if not the most diverse city in the world. But for 2051, our higher aspirations is to become the most inclusive city in the world. We know that development will continue to occur and happen across the city. We want to make sure that we are creating one that is as inclusive as it can be. And trying to become the most inclusive city of the world, and how we're, so we know that we're going to grow by a minimum of 700,000 people. And we usually far exceed the province's minimum forecasts. And we do know that the federal government has set higher immigration targets for the country. And we also know that Toronto is and always has been a very, very attractive place for newcomers to settle into. And so we want to make sure that the city of Toronto is one that can continue to welcome newcomers, and that we've set the roadmap for pathways to prosperity for those who choose Toronto as home. And lastly, how do we get there? We think these three principles help us get to a successful inclusive city, and these principles help us to help inform our land use decision making as we go. So, for example, so the three principles for successful city building requires access, equity, and inclusion. In terms of access, it's about improving access to many facets of daily life, like access to work, access to good transit, access to affordable housing across the city. In terms of equity, and when we say we apply an equity lens, it's about identifying and removing barriers for the city's most marginalized and vulnerable communities, so that we can achieve transformative, inclusive growth. In some instances, the status quo is not the 2051 Toronto that we want to see. And lastly, in terms of inclusion, it is, again, as I mentioned, creating a very safe and inclusive city for all Torontonians, regardless of age or ability, and for all Torontonians and those yet to arrive. And so with that, I believe I pass it back over to Kristen.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So we're going to go to a couple questions, our final questions in Mentimeter. So you can get your smartphone or go to your desktop browser, mentee.com. So we have a question here about the first piece that Jeff presented about the Reconciliation Action Plan and Indigenous planning perspectives. But are you familiar with the city's Reconciliation Action Plan, which was recently adopted by City Council? So we have yes, no, or I will look at it after this meeting. And for those of you who want more information, the link was provided in the chat. But many of you are familiar, and that's great. Okay, some of you are going to look at it after the meeting, but we'll go to the next question. So the next questions are about the vision that Jeff just presented and how supportive are you of that vision. So that vision included eliminating disparities, prioritizing climate action, and the goal to be the most inclusive city. So you can rank your support between strongly disagree and strongly agree. Okay, see some answers still rolling in. Right now, everywhere between 4.5 and 4.9. And if you have any comments on these things to provide more context to your answer, please put them in the chat. Happy to hear your thoughts on these. Okay, we'll go to the next question. So this is how supportive are you of the official plan principles? So those are the last slide that Jeff outlined, and the principles being access, equity, and inclusion. And the scale, again, being from strongly disagree with these principles to strongly agree with these principles. Okay, so all of them sitting at 4.8 right now, but we'll give a few moments more for people to respond. And this is our last Mentimeter question for today. Okay, so thank you everyone for your participation in these questions. They were informative for the project team and helpful to guide the discussion today. I'll hand it over to Jeff to go through the next steps on his end.
Sure. Thanks, Kristen. So just last week, Planning and Housing Committee dealt with environment and climate change policies, and it's going to City Council, I think, next week for final adoption before it goes up to the Minister for approval. We've mentioned the July 5th date quite a bit today, and we will have our final major transit station and protected major transit station area report going forward with 115 of them. Our employment policies and employment conversions, again, that will go to July 5th. And then the following City Council is, I think it's July 19th. And then from there, work continues on our end for the remaining major transit station areas that require local area studies. Again, the remaining 100 or so final assessments and recommendations for the remaining conversion requests. And then, as I mentioned as well, the Indigenous planning perspectives and draft 2051 official plan vision and directions that we will continue to engage on and then hopefully report early in the new year. So thanks for that. Kristen?
Okay, great. We'll go to the next slide. So these are some of our engagement dates that are coming up. Now, as you see, there's a bunch of meetings that just took place over the past couple weeks, and we have today's meeting, the statutory public open house. But we do have a few more meetings coming up that are digging in deeper to a few policy areas. So on June 21st, we have employment lands and the future of work. On June 22nd, we have neighborhoods and complete communities. On June 23rd, we have housing and intensification, and these are all from 5 till 7 p.m. We also have the story map up live, the MTSA one, and one that kind of gives an overview of this material you saw presented tonight or today, so you could go check that out. We'll go to the next slide and just give a big thank you. We heard a lot today from everyone on the implementation of bike lanes and bus lanes, the challenge of affordability and jobs in our city, the need for a complete communities approach to our MTSAs, employment in MTSAs, tree protection, especially that old growth, those trees, and artist spaces and studios, and that culture master plan. So lots of great feedback today. Really appreciate all your participation. The presentations and the video of the presentation will be posted on the website toronto.ca/ourplan. But again, just want to thank you all for attending today and for your time. Have a great rest of your day.